Okay, I'm Nick Volz. I'm the trumpet professor here at Loyola, and I teach on various areas of the faculty, part of the classical performance faculty and jazz performance faculty, and also music education. So I get to teach in a variety of areas, and it's nice to be back here because I did my undergraduate degree at Loyola University, and from there I ended up teaching at Southeastern Louisiana University, so I got a master's degree from there, and got a large education as a performer on the road, doing around 300 gigs a year for several years, and then kind of decided to go back and get a doctorate, and I went to Indiana University. As a trumpet player, I think you have certain advantages that maybe other instruments don't have, in that a trumpet is an integral part of a symphony orchestra, but it's also part of a jazz band or a jazz combo. It's also very much present in Latin music and funk and rock and everything in between. So I've kind of taken advantage of that. Growing up here in New Orleans, that was something we always did, was learn classical and jazz. So I kind of had a hand in all areas. I have tons of heroes in the musical world. Just on the trumpet alone, if I'm playing a French piece, I love Maurice Andre. You know, if I'm playing in a symphony orchestra, I love Bud Herseth or Philip Smith. If I'm playing straight ahead jazz, I mean that list goes on and on. But you know, present day guys: Terrence Blanchard, Nicholas Payton, John Swana. You know, other guys: Freddie Hubbard, Clifford Brown, Miles. So everyone you can take a little bitty piece of inspiration from. You know, audition is a beast of its own, right? So as performers, here we are. We're trained to go out and play in public and interact with an audience and deliver a product to an audience, and you get a certain amount of feedback from that audience. If it's a crowd of 10 or if it's a crowd of 10,000, it doesn't matter. There's very much that dynamic. An audition has none of that. Oftentimes you walk into a cold room and you're playing at a curtain. So you kind of have to create that ambiance. So it's very, very much a different mentality walking into an audition. When I tell my students how to prepare for those, we do, of course, you have to practice auditioning because it's very much an experience that you otherwise wouldn't get. So we do things like have someone walk into the room, or maybe even jog around the building once, get the heart rate elevated, and then walk in the room and have to play down their audition piece. Because it's that uncomfortable. You know, there's nothing natural about going in and playing for a panel of people who aren't looking at you and aren't going to clap after you play. So that's the most advice. That, and be yourself. I mean, there's a way to truly represent yourself in an audition, classical, jazz, you name it. You know, just go in and make music. Practice routine is something I'm very, very big on. Those that have ever studied with me can confirm that. Something I got into in my years of touring. So I was on tour with a 6-piece group, and I was the only trumpet player. And we'd be one night in San Francisco, the next night in LA, the next night in another town. So we'd hop in the tour van or bus, whatever it was at the time, and next thing you know, we're at a new place. So I'd get out, and fundamentals are essential, especially for trumpet players, to get things happening, get things resonating, find our sound. So every day I touch on certain areas. One is long tones, you know, really developing the sound, and flow studies, slow flexibility and fast flexibility, things like Schlossberg and R-bands, irons, articulation, so single tonguing, double tonguing, and triple tonguing every day, because I might not need my triple tonguing every day, but I tell everyone, if you haven't worked on it every day, it won't exactly be there on demand. So that's sort of our technical palette. And then we also work on things, transposition, sight reading, maybe a new harmonic concept of improvisation, those were the things I touched on every day. Of course, every night I was typically improvising and playing in that context, so that was taken care of. But yeah, routine is essential. And I say, in terms of a student's routine, plan on it at least an hour, and something where you can touch on all areas of fundamentals, and put it somewhere early in the day. Get it out of the way. You know, let's establish the correct habits early on. Yeah, trumpet is a very physical instrument. I always play better when I am running or working out, or I'm in top physical condition. So I think that's an important part of it. Now, that being said, I've seen a lot of, you know, men into their old age who are not in the best of shape, and you know, very obese younger players who are not in great shape who can play beautifully, but it only it improves our efficiency, because that's ultimately what we're trying to work on as trumpet players and brass players is, okay, anyone can play this, but can you play it efficiently, and can you make it sound easy? You know? Yeah, I mean, music, there have been dozens and dozens of studies of the benefits of music for anyone. So music in the curriculum, music for younger kids, adults. So for me, a kid who grew up in the band program here in New Orleans and then grew up kind of gigging through the system, you get exposed to people from all walks of life, and you get experience working with people. So I think both of those are crucial. You sort of, something they try and stimulate in the classrooms in high school is, oh, let's practice working together. And as a kid in the band, that never made sense to me, because that's what we were already doing anyway, you know. So I think that's a large part of it. Spatial visualization and all of those aspects. Of course, the studies are out there, and increased math scores, science scores. There are tons of benefits. But for me personally, music has been wonderful. I mean, just as a trumpet player from New Orleans, it's taken me all around the world. It's since I was 18, I haven't had a job outside of music, which is great. Enabled me to meet my wife on tour, which was fantastic. So it's, you know, it's provided a wonderful life for me. I did not grow up in a musical family. They were not opposed to it necessarily. They were very supportive, you know, getting me trumpet lessons from when I was in 5th grade, and piano lessons when I was in high school, and, you know, kind of spoiled me in that regard. But no, I'm the first one in my family to pursue a musical career. Yeah, I've been very fortunate in that regard. A lot of people, I'm still a young guy to be here as a tenure track professor, and I think that some people look and say, oh, this guy's been successful as young. I think a lot of my success early on came from having just dynamite teachers every step of the way. And there are some great teachers out there, and sometimes students get to them at the wrong stage of their career. That's essential as well, getting hooked up with the right teacher for you at the right point in your career. So even my beginner band director and over on the West Bank in Algiers, Paul Freeshoe, he was just a dynamite musician, a guy who really cared about his students. I was fortunate to have a private trumpet teacher who played here in the symphony, Ron Benko, and he has quite a list of private trumpet students, including, you know, Wynton Marsalis and kind of all the guys who came through New Orleans, grew up studying with him. You know, my high school band directors were great. Of course, coming to Loyola, I had great teachers, and just throughout my progress. Yeah, preparing my students is a difficult thing, because as a teacher, you can't take the same approach across the board. You can have underlying principles that you stand to. In other words, you can't say, oh, well, it's okay to not practice for weeks on end. No, that doesn't work for anyone. And building a morning routine is a very large part of that for me. But every student requires a different approach. And a large part of what I do, even from the very first lesson, I sit down and say, okay, where do you feel that you stand right now? Strengths, weaknesses, etc. what are you hoping to do with trumpet in your life? So that leaves it wide open, and I think that's an essential part of being a college applied teacher. In a way, you're sort of like a mirror. So in other words, the student might have one idea of what they think they are capable of, and oftentimes it's way below what they're actually capable of. Sometimes they might have an elevated opinion of their own playing, in which case you have to bring them back down to reality. But that's a large part of what I believe I teach, is helping them realize that goal and then helping them get there. There are masterful composers and arrangers throughout time, of course. Just looking at 20th century on, I mean, Stravinsky was groundbreaking with what he did. We've got, Prokofiev, and the list goes on and on. In terms of if I'm writing, especially I guess most of my composing and arranging has been out of necessity. In other words, we have a studio session and we need a three-piece horn part for this or that. The sort of larger works, chamber works, things like that have strictly been for enjoyment at this point in my career. But if I'm writing, if it's a funk or an R&B style horn section, I'm going to look at models, really successful models like Stevie Wonder's records and Michael Jackson's records, even Tower of Power and some of that stuff. And classical versus jazz, is there a conflict? Is this going to hurt me? Is the jazz going to make me a bad classical player? Is vice versa? Is the classical going to make me not swing? No, I think it's all great trumpet playing. They really complement each other well. It's all great musicianship. And if you look at the great players out there, they've all studied both at some point. You don't have to necessarily point to a crossover style player like Wynton Marsalis or some of the others out there. But even someone like Freddie Hubbard, who was primarily known as a jazz musician, he grew up playing French horn and studying classical. And I think they very much complement each other. L'Histoire is great. Yeah, that's Stravinsky. One great classical work it's difficult to narrow down to one for trumpet. Okay, if I were to pick an orchestral piece, I would love to play principal trumpet on Mahler's Fifth Symphony. That's just it's one of those where the trumpet is sort of the hero of the orchestra, and you have a lot of just beautiful writing, and Mahler's writing was always beautiful, but that's a piece I really love to play. There's a number of great solo pieces, but I'm always discovering new ones, so. It's tough to narrow down to one single incident. Actually, I can remember one that just I'm always listening to new performers and going out and hearing people, so it's sort of inspiration comes on a daily basis for me. But I can remember I was in the middle of my undergraduate degree, or near the end of it. Nicholas Payton had done a tribute to Louis Armstrong called Dear Louis, and he did all these fresh arrangements for big band on Armstrong's music and toured with it for the whole year, the 100th year of Louis' birth. And I got to hear that band live, and it was, breathtaking. Just, one of those magical moments. It wasn't a sold-out theater. It was a nice crowd, but it was one of those where I felt every trumpet player in the world should have been there, It really was. In 5 years, I would like to see myself here at Loyola University in New Orleans. This is sort of my dream job, if it's okay to say that, because it's here in my hometown. And if you think about it, I'm here, I'm training music educators and jazz performers and trumpet performers and music industry professionals. So why not do that in a city like New Orleans? If I'm in the middle of nowhere, I might have some ethical issues about training all these trumpet players and getting them to a high level and not having any placement for them. So yeah, in 5 years I very much hope to be here at Loyola with just an even higher level of performance going. I think that we've already sort of established ourselves as the music school here in New Orleans, but I think we could continue to expand because there's really no other school like Loyola in the country.